With regard to your book, I noticed that you begin by looking at the kinds of reports of entities from people who've had UFO contact and UFO abduction. So you start out with talking about extraterrestrial aliens, basically. For example, the Mantids and the Greys and the reptilians and so forth. Is there a reason why you put those right up front in your book?
Yeah, that was one of the main themes that we tried to address in the book, was the very interesting overlap between the alien abduction experience, UFO contactee experience, and what people have encountered on their DMT journeys. They're interesting, as you mentioned, the reptilians, the gray aliens, the mantid beings are common in the reports of both the alien abduction phenomena and the DMT entity contact reports. I spoke to the Harvard psychiatric researcher John Mack about this years ago, and he also noticed it, and Terence McKenna also pointed this out. So it gives more credibility to the idea or the possibility that there could be some kind of genuine, objective reality to this, because it's encountered in both types of experiences, many of the same beings. I mean, it's just remarkable and fascinating that people report, so many, even just with DMT, that they report so many common entities during these experiences. I mean, you wouldn't expect it if it was just a hallucination, right?
Well, I'm very glad you brought up the late psychiatrist from Harvard University, John Mack, who was very interested in researching people who thought that they had been abducted. John Mack actually wrote the foreword to a book of mine that came out 20 years ago called The PK Man, about a fellow named Ted Owens who believed that mantid aliens had operated on his brain and gave him unusual psychic abilities. I studied the fellow from 1976 until he died in 1987. He produced many, many demonstrations regarding the authenticity of his macro-psychokinetic abilities that he attributed to these mantid-like beings. And now I have the privilege of interviewing an individual who, for the first time really, who claims also to have had a mantid-like being operate on his brain.
Yeah, I had a mantid creature operate on my brain too. I mean, it's fascinating that the mantid creatures are so common, but it's very rare that you hear about caterpillar people or grasshopper people or other insects. There's something about the mantids that are incredibly frequent in these type of reports.
Well, why don't you describe in a little more detail what that experience was like?
The experience, my personal experience?
Yes. Your person, like, where were you? What you were ingesting a psychedelic substance? What was it?
Yeah, this was my very first experience with DMT, dimethyltryptamine. When I was around 20, 21 years old, I was at a friend's house it was something that I had really wanted to try. This was back in the early 80s when hardly anybody, knew what DMT was back then. I mean, it was pretty much only known to psychedelic, aficionados, the use of DMT. I managed to take 3 large, tokes of this very disgusting tasting substance that's, tasted like burning plastic when I was smoking it. And after about the third hit, I was way higher than any experience I've ever had with LSD or psilocybin or any other psychedelic experience. And suddenly I felt myself just burst, like I was going through a membrane into another reality, where I was able to see in 360 degrees all at once simultaneously. And I saw elf-like creatures diving into tubular-like machines. And within just, a few seconds, this mantid-like creature, noticed me and came over and pinned me to the ground and began what seemed like it was experimenting on my brain, or fine-tuning my brain, or adjusting adjusting something in my brain. It was like, it was sort of, producing all these different intensities, synesthetic intensities that were like all of my senses going at once. And it was like measuring something and adjusting something as it was doing this. It was actually a terrifying experience. But when I came back from that experience, I was just absolutely dumbfounded about the reality of it. It seemed so incredibly real. The word people use is realer than real with these types of experiences. So it left me with this incredibly, staggering sense of, is there really a reality to this? And a day has not gone by, since I had that experience and, wondering about that. And that was largely the motivation for doing the book. What the creature actually looked like, I think you asked. I mean, it was like a 6 foot tall praying mantis. I mean, a giant creature that had somewhat humanoid type, it wasn't completely insectoid. There was some humanoid aspects to it. But the really weird thing about it was the face on the creature. It had the body of a praying mantis, pretty much, but it had my face. It was my own face on this creature, and in retrospect, when I've thought about this over the years, I was doing neuroscience research at the time at NYU, and I was wondering if it was like trying to show me from the perspective of the animal, the laboratory animal, what it was like, to be experimented on. So there was sort of a personal message in that for me as well. But it was basically a terrifying experience, but absolutely, mind-blowing and compelling nonetheless. And like I said, I have not gone a day without not thinking about that experience.
So it would seem as if it was a turning point in your life.
Yeah. And it's harder for me to articulate, but there was some type of change that occurred. I didn't quite see the world in the same way. It was almost like whatever adjustments or fine tuning it did, it made me see the world differently. I have a harder time putting that into words exactly what it did, but I somehow just, feel like when certain things happen in my life, it just suddenly brings me back to that moment. And I feel like it was due to what seemed like the fine tuning or the adjustments that were being done in my brain at the time.